Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, what is a producer and what is the difference between a producer and an engineer? This is something that has come up a few times in the comment sections of my videos where people have asked, what exactly is a record producer? When I talk about my albums, I always mention who the producer is, and I always then sort of talk about the sound of the record. So a producer can be a bunch of different things. All right, in the traditional sense of a producer in the 70s and the 80s, it has changed as when illegal downloading hit and bands and their budgets changed. The role of a producer changed greatly. But speaking in a 70s, 80s, 90s concept of what a producer is, you can sort of think of them like the owner of a restaurant. Okay, they're the person that is going to be handling the budget, overseeing everything, setting the hours, work hours, setting deadlines, making general decisions about how an album is, if it's a restaurant owner, what the restaurant is going to be about, what the decor on the inside is going to be. Now, a restaurant owner is most likely not somebody who's back in the kitchen or working behind the counter, but they're sort of the person, maybe another analogy would be a coach of a team. They're the person who decides how things are going to run. They set up a plan and they're in charge of executing that plan. Now, that doesn't mean that a band obviously has their own sound. They have their own vision. But what a good producer does is a good producer is able to recognize what a band is about and get that sound and what the band wants and the record label wants and get that onto tape, record, CD, whatever. And they are often the in-between person between the label and the band when it comes to the recording. In the 80s and the 70s, the labels a lot of times would, especially for newer bands, would say, okay, you have to work with this producer. And the label would maybe know that producer, know that they were able to make good records within a certain time frame and a certain budget. So the record label would say, okay, here you go, here's your budget, here's the time frame, here's when we want it out. And if it was a producer that they were familiar with and they knew, that producer would be able to get that product done in that time frame. Now, I only know what I know about these things are just from stuff that I've read, and I'm not a producer. I have recorded stuff in studios, but I've never worked with a producer. I would encourage people, and I'll try to leave a link in the description for this. There's a guy that has a very interesting website and podcast called Full in Bloom, where he interviews a lot of producers, especially guys that worked on the 80s albums. For instance, he's talked to extensively with Tom Werman, who's worked with like Twisted Sister, LA Guns, Poison. He talks to Beau Hill, who worked with Rat. And for instance, the Beau Hill is a good example. I don't remember what label. I think Rat was signed to Atlantic Records. Beau Hill, Atlantic Records comes to Beau Hill, says, we've got this new band, Rat, we want you to produce them. Rat didn't like the idea of working with him. I think he was a relatively new producer at the time. And he talks about how, he set a schedule for them. We got to start at this time every day. He had a certain system that he used. But the record label felt comfortable, like, okay, you're in charge of this. Get these guys in here, get these songs together. So what a lot of these producers will talk about, and this is where there's different types of producers. So there's some producers who are very involved in the songwriting, in where the band is going, making artistic decisions. An example of a producer like that would be Mutt Lang. Mutt Lang worked with AC/DC on Highway to Hell and Back in Black, Def Leppard. You know, he in the '80s he had the golden touch. He would work with a band and make these. He had a certain sound. He would make these albums. They were very well produced, very tight, very musically. Everything's in tune. Everything's in tempo. Every little drum fill. You know, he was a guy that really came in and took control of certain sessions. And he would also at times get writing credits with certain bands. And there's a really interesting YouTube channel, and I'll try to leave a link in the description for this also. I believe his name is Dr. Bob, and he's a guy that had worked with Mutt Lang as, I guess, an engineer, or worked with him in the studio. And he talks about how there's a demo out there of Def Leppard's Pour Some Sugar on Me. And he makes a video about this because I don't know if you've seen these vocal teachers react videos. There's a vocal teacher out there reacting to this Def Leppard demo, and he thinks it's Joe Elliott singing on it, but it's actually Mutt Lang singing on this demo. And the crazy thing is Mutt sounds just like Joe Elliott. And this Dr. Bob, who worked with Mutt, talks about how Mutt would do this. He would make demos of songs, and he was a great singer, and he would sing it just like whoever he was working with. So the singer could hear it and go, oh, okay, this makes, you know, they would be able to understand it. So Mutt Lang is a guy that got in there with the songwriting, that would make artistic decisions for the bands. Now, he didn't do that with everybody, like with AC/DC. He doesn't have any writing credits with AC/DC. But he was the type of producer that would come in and the band, this is typically a job of any producer, is the band would play a song, for instance, and let's say they're recording the bass and the drums, or the bass and the drums and the rhythm guitar. And the producer is the guy that says, okay, that wasn't tight enough. That one spot in the song was kind of sloppy. Or if they're doing a vocal take, the producer's got to say, that was a little bit out of tune. Okay, you got to do that again. Try it again. You know, give it another shot. Bob Rock, here's another producer. You can see Bob Rock in the Some Kind of Monster Metallica movie. You can see him working with Metallica, and there's a lot of interesting scenes where you can hear him saying, like, there's a scene where I think it's on the song The Unforgiven, where Kirk Hammett is playing a solo, and it's terrible. It's just absolutely terrible. And Bob is just like, no, that stinks. You know, we're not using that. And Kirk Hammett he starts to get really pissed about it. But Bob is just like, no, that's just not good enough. You need to go home. You need to, you need to work something out, because this just ain't working. And you can hear him sort of talking, like giving him ideas, like, okay, you need to have something that builds, maybe start up here and go up here. So that is the role of the producer, where, the guitar player, for instance, telling him, okay, so go in that direction. Or maybe the singer sings something a few different ways and he goes, oh, okay, do it that way. That's the way you want to do it. So a good producer has that ear to know when he's gotten the right take. He can know the band. For instance, Mutt Lang, I can't remember who the engineer is who worked on Back in Black. We're going to get to what an engineer is in a second. But I heard an interview with him where he talked about AC/DC was really basically a live band. And AC/DC was about them playing live, getting a good feel, getting the right feel for the song in a live setting. And that's how they went about recording AC/DC, whereas Def Leppard was more of a pieced together and patched together. There's a Def Leppard movie, made for TV movie, with actors and stuff, and it shows them working with him on the Mutt Lang on the High and Dry album, and they're doing Bringing on the Heartbreak, and he's telling Joe Elliott, like, no, you got to go up here, you got to sing it again, and eventually, like, why are you making me sing this a million times? And he's like, okay, hold on, he goes, and he's making them play it over and over, and he goes, all right, guys, just wait, they're ready to, leave the studio and just throw in the towel, and he plays it back, and there's like millions of vocals on it, and it's the Bringing on the Heartbreak that we know with the big, huge chorus, and the band is like, whoa. So that is an example of a producer taking a band, saying, okay, let's layer this, let's double this, and somebody like Mutt Lang a lot of times is even making decisions like, okay, you got it, there's too many verses in this, that ending is too long, you got to trim this down, he was very good at finding what a band was good about and focusing on that and making that work, and even being, like I said, involved in the songwriting. Now, people like Bo Hill and Tom Worman, I'm not sure. I don't think they were quite as involved in the actual changing of the songs, but they still did. When you hear these interviews with them, they made decisions like, okay, that's not good enough. You need to play that again. One of them, I don't remember who worked with Warrant. I think Tom Worman worked with Warrant. I'm not 100% sure about that. And he talks about how the guitar players, their leads just weren't cutting it. And this was the era of the Guitar Hero. And so he brought in a studio musician to play the leads, and sometimes the producer has to also has to be the guy who balances personalities. You'll hear these guys talk about how, like for instance in Dokken, George Lynch and Don Dokken didn't get along, so the producer is the guy who has to sort of handle people's personalities in order to get things done. Again, they're sort of like the coach of the team, right? They're, when a team is, I'm a hockey fan, so when a hockey team is performing badly, the first people everybody looks at is the coach, because they're kind of the person that's in charge of balancing out personalities and deciding what works best with these group of players. And it's the same thing with bands and making records. Now, there are some producers that are a little bit more hands-off, and they're more. So a good example of this would be the guy that worked with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Rick Rubin. Okay, Rick Rubin. He's worked with Slayer. He's worked with a bunch of people, and Rick Rubin now he's sort of become this guy. He worked on Black Sabbath's 13 album. That he's become this guy that when a band kind of has lost their way and needs to find their sound again, you sort of call Rick Rubin. And what Rick Rubin did with like Black Sabbath, he sort of did this with Johnny Cash also. He sort of brought what was good about Johnny Cash but sort of updated it for a new era. So what he did with Black Sabbath was he apparently locked them in a room and made them listen to the first 3 Black Sabbath albums and make them understand that the success they had in those early days was because of the blues influence and jazz influence in their sound, and to get back to that. But there's a great clip of Rick Rubin working with the Red Hot Chili Peppers on the Blood Sugar Sex Magic album. And Rick Rubin is this guy, and you'll hear people that have worked with him sometimes complain about this. You see him in the Black Sabbath and with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, he like brings a bed in and he's just sort of laying there. He's sort of this sort of hippie guy with the big beard and never wears any shoes. And he's just sort of laying there on a bed while the Chili Peppers are like recording stuff. And he'll just sort of sit up every now and then and make a comment here and there. But there's a scene where Flea is working on the bass line for the song Give It Away. And his original bass line is like really busy. It's like boom, and Rick stops him and he's like, no, man, it's got to be simple. You just got to go boom, ba-dee-da, boom, bum, bum, ba-dee-da, bum. And as soon as Flea plays that, the entire song comes together. And when you think of that song, Give It Away, it's the bass line that carries that whole song. So there is a great example of a producer. It seems like he's not really doing anything, but all of a sudden he sits up and goes, no, you got to do it this way. And all of a sudden the whole song just falls into place and the whole song clicks. So there's different styles with different producers. Rick Rubin is a little bit more laid back, more of a cerebral, intellectual, like putting the artists and the bands in the right headspace. Whereas Mutt Lang is a guy that gets in there and is like, no, your hi-hat is not, in time. You got to do the hi-hat better. He was a guy famous for like his snare drum sounds that had that big reverb gated like 80s sounds. He just got more in control with the bands. And then of course you have different varying levels with that with producers. Now an engineer is someone who's in charge of setting up the microphones. The producer comes in and says, I want this type of sound, or these drums are too boomy. What do we got to do? And the engineer is usually somebody who works in the studio, knows the studio, and he's the person then that sets up the microphones, takes the producer what the producer wants, and he knows how to get that sound with the equipment in the studio that they're in. A lot of times producers have engineers that they like to work with because they know, okay, I know this guy knows how to get this sound. And certain producers have studios they like to work in. I don't remember who the one interview was with. I think he was talking about Creator, working with Creator. And he was saying how he had a studio that he worked in. He had a drum guy that as soon as he worked with any band, he had a drum guy that he always rented his drums from. So the drum guy would talk to the drummer in the band, figure out exactly what kind of kit they used, and would have this perfectly tuned, great sounding drum kit ready to go in the studio. And that's the only way he would work. He had certain mic. He had like 3 different vocal mics he used, depending on what kind of singer it was. He had his system and his sound. And good producers will have that. They will have their own sound. A great example of this is also Bob Ezrin, one of my favorite producers. Listen to Alice Cooper's $1 Billion Babies, and then listen to Kiss's Destroyer album, and you will hear what the sound of Bob Ezrin. All the bells and whistles and horns and strings and choirs that you hear on those 2 albums, that's Bob Ezrin. Beth by Kiss, all those strings and everything, that's Bob Ezrin. Bob Ezrin was known for that, for coming in and orchestrating things and just adding all these layers and choirs and harmonies and xylophones and bells and whistles and all this other stuff. So good producers have their own sound that they imprint on the band, and some do it in different ways. Bob Ezrin with his orchestral arrangements, Mutt Lang with his contributing with the songwriting and the sound of the instruments. Other guys, again, just with the overall general sound. All right, so there you go. Well, not so quick. I was going to say quick explanation of what a producer is and what an engineer is. I sort of glossed over. The engineers, this is why I usually don't mention the engineer, because they can have a part in the sound of a record, but it's really the producer is the final guy. He's the guy that when it's all over says, okay, it's done, and gives the stamp of approval on it. Maybe some other time we'll talk about the mastering engineer. I've mentioned this in other videos just very quickly. When the band is done recording all their songs, everything gets sent to a mastering engineer, and he's the guy that glues it all together. He sets the levels between songs. He sets the timing between songs. He makes sure that the first song on the record isn't really bright and the last song isn't really bassy. He sort of sets the EQ for the whole record, lays it all out so it's ready to be duplicated. So, all right, there you go. What a producer is, what an engineer is, what a mastering engineer is. I'm not any of these, so if you have things to share about this, your opinions, your thoughts, who are some of your favorite producers, leave them down in the comments down below. This is a great learning thing. I've done other videos. When I did the remaster reissue thing, a lot of people had a lot of great thoughts and great comments, so we're all learning here together. Leave some comments down below what you think and what you know about this. Make sure you hit like and subscribe. Later on, The Alchemist, all over the place, all the social media stuff, and until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.